Good morning and welcome to our webinar today, Enriching Collections with Immersive Technology. I'm Linda Coburn, I'm the moderator today, and I'm going to set the scene for you and organise and guide you through the webinar. So the webinar is brought to you by The Space, and then this slide tells you a little bit about The Space, who we are and what we do. And in essence, we're the UK's digital commissioning and development agency for the arts and cultural sector. And the content of the webinar today is really 3 brilliant case studies from work by organisations who we have supported in their use of immersive tech. So we're going to hear, as I said, 3 case studies today. I'll just give you a flavour of what they're going to be. Firstly, we'll hear from Louise Stafford, who's the Director of Learning at the National Holocaust Centre and Museum, talking about their project Forever Online, which she will say more about. And then our second case study is an audio project, Cornish Tales, a collaboration with the Cornwall Museum's Partnership. And the case study is brought to you by Claire Freeman, who's an audio consultant, and also Rob Lindsay, our head of programming. And then just a 5-minute break, so you can take a moment from the screen and have a think about some of the questions and issues and whether there's other questions that you want to ask. And then we'll return with Paul Long, who's the Director of MBD, an immersive storytelling organisation, and he's looking at their collaboration with the Herbert Art Gallery Museum Heritage Stories. Then we've got some time with all of the panellists for the kind of bigger overall questions and anything that we haven't covered so far. The practical issues to tell you about are that we use the chat option a lot, both for specific questions. If there's something that you want to ask one of our panelists, put your questions into chat, and it's a good opportunity for you to say hello to each other, find out who's on the call, and then have discussions as well, and useful links and sharing goes on in there as well. We have Claire Hill with us. She's our live captioner, and Claire will be working alongside the speakers. So if you would like captions, go to the bottom of your screen and select that option. And thirdly, we record the session so that if anybody wants to see it afterwards, they can do so, and it'll be on our YouTube channel for a period of some months afterwards. And lastly, at the end of the session, we'll ask you to fill in an evaluation. It's really quick, just a few questions, but of course, those evaluations really help us to understand what works, what doesn't, and to keep on bringing webinars to you. So that's our practical background. And to start with, kick off, Rob Lindsay, our head of programming, is going to give you a sense of why this matters to the space, some of the sort of important considerations when collection owners and museums are thinking about using immersive tech with their objects and their artifacts. Rob.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Linda. Hello, everyone. Welcome today. It's really great to see you all here. Yeah, as Linda was saying, the space were originally set up in order to help the arts, creative, heritage, cultural sectors connect their offers to audiences through digital means. That might be online, it might be offline, it might be live, it might be captured, it can take all sorts of different forms. Certainly the case studies that you're going to see here today have taken very, very different forms as well. Projects that have been right for the organisations at that moment in time, projects that have been right for the pieces that were being offered to audiences, to viewers, to visitors, and certainly pieces that were right for those viewers, those visitors themselves as well. It's really, really important to consider that you're going to see 3 case studies, and you may well think, well, I'm not sure how that specific project could be applied to me, but we're certainly going to be talking through not just the end results, but some of the decisions that led people there, how these projects evolved, how they were strategically put together, and how they're intended strategically to continue on as well. It's hugely, hugely important to the space that the work that we support offers these insights, offers these potential next steps for other organisations, in addition to the organisations that we support directly as well. And we really hope that these case studies will feel informative, insightful, and inspiring to all of you as well. We are very, very, very aware that for a lot of organisations, the past 18 months, 2 years, have been incredibly disruptive. For many of us, we have been looking at ways of maintaining visibility with our visitors, maintaining relevance with our communities, with those who were unable to come and see us, and those who we were unable to interact with in person or in real life. Certainly where we were, those were limited. There is a sense that we're coming out of this time now, but at the same time, this isn't to say that we might see further disruption up ahead, or at the same time that we may not have really demonstrated to ourselves that there are huge swathes of audiences who, for various access reasons, are unable to interact with us in real life, or have been unable to take part in our in-person, more traditional offerings. I know that all of us will be doing a great deal of work, and have been doing a great deal of work far before COVID, in order to try and make our work as accessible as possible. And again, it's really important to realize some of the shifts that have happened over the last 18 months in terms of our visitor engagement levels, in terms of their appetite for digital, in terms of the learning curve that they themselves have gone on around digital tools as well, and the new spaces that these represent for us to move into, to meet them there, to communicate and engage with them in those places as well. So again, as I say, without further ado, I'm going to pass back to Linda in order to introduce our speakers. As I say, I really hope that you'll get a lot out of them. We'll have opportunities for questions, and I'll be around throughout the day as well to join in. But yeah, we really hope you get a lot out of this. Huge thanks to all the speakers who have joined us today, and I'll pass back to Linda now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. So as I said, our first speaker today is Louise Stafford, who's the Director of Learning at the National Holocaust Centre and Museum. And Louise, are you there?
I am here. Yes, thank you very much, Linda. It's lovely to be with you this morning. Thank you so much for inviting me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Fantastic.
We were going to start really, weren't we, rather than talking about the specific project, the Forever project that you're going to be sharing with us, but you're going to give us a show round of the site and really bring it to life that way. So do you want to just kick off, Louise?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you very much. So I'm hoping that I'm managing to kind of hide all of the things that might disrupt you being able to see this. And hopefully you can see on your screen, Linda, if I just check that you can see it on yours,
yes,
please, a picture of Steve Mendelsohn.
I can.
So I'm joining you as part of the team at the National Holocaust Centre and Museum, and hopefully I'll get a chance to tell you a little bit more about our organisation in a second. But by far the most privileged aspect of our work is being able to work with survivors of the Holocaust. And you can see on your screens in front of you Steve Mendelsohn, who came to Britain on the Kindertransport to flee Nazi persecution. And Steve was somebody who I knew really well, who I worked with often, a really kind, gentle man who was just absolutely fantastic, working with primary age students as well as others, and incredibly mischievous and cheeky and very funny. And Steve passed away around 4 years ago, but Steve had already been filmed as part of our Forever project, and I'm just going to introduce Steve's testimony to you.
Hello there. My name is Steve Mendelsohn. I was born in Germany in a city called Breslau in 1926. That city today is Polish, it's in Poland, and it's called Wrocław.
So I'm going to share a little bit more with you about the different aspects of the Forever project in a second, but one of the really incredible aspects of this resource is the ability to ask the survivors questions and to have those questions answered using the technology of the database. And Steve obviously speaks about his experiences in Germany as a child before leaving on the Kindertransport. And I'm going to ask Steve, what was your experience of the night of broken glass?
We received, my mother received a phone call early on the morning of the 9th of September 1938. Don't send the children to school. And she says, who are you? Don't send the children to school. Who is speaking, please? Don't send the children to school, and then put the phone down. It was obviously a German person who was not prepared to give his or her name, but just to warn my mother that things were happening out there and you mustn't send the kids to school.
And one of the things that I think is just really incredible about that piece of testimony from Steve there is the fact that for us, when we heard Steve share his testimony at the centre, and particularly when he was speaking to young people, that was one of the aspects of his testimony which he didn't share on a regular basis. So the riots that Steve is speaking about there, the night of broken glass, was a real turning point for Jewish families in Germany and other places, and the point at which, through state-sanctioned violence, they knew that life was changed irrevocably. And it was the point at which there was a real desperation for families to become refugees, and those children, obviously, which left on the kinder transport. And that really short excerpt of testimony there is so powerful in not only drawing out the severity of what was happening for Steve as a child, as a boy, and for his parents, but also in terms of for us as an educational organisation working with young people to draw out that element of choices and responsibility and the actions of those in the community that Steve was part of. So one of the things that we have found through the Forever Project and through filming the survivors who were involved, not only in sharing their full testimony, but also in sharing their responses to up to 1,000 questions, is that we have drawn out just really specific and really important aspects of testimony that for us as educators at times we hadn't heard before. So in terms of the site that we have been sharing with students over about the last year, one of the things that we have found really important is just the contextualization of the testimony. So when students or the educators with students access the microsite, then the first thing that they are able to do is share the full testimony of the survivor whose testimony they are working with. But we have also, as an education team, broken this down into key themes so that we're able to share shorter excerpts of testimony with the students, and we're also just able to model examples of questions for them that give them a sense of the range of questions that are available to them. To be
Hello there.
Students are there.
My name is Steve Mendelson.
Able to go into, apologies Steve, are then able to go into the conversation section and to be able to have just a free flow conversation or modelled conversation in which they're able to access those different aspects of testimony.
Louise, are you going to show us anything else, or do you want to come back in?
Thank you, Linda. I was just checking there for my window. Would I be able to come back in, please?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
So you've given us a really good sort of flavour of what the Forever Project does and how it works. Can you can you sort of you explain to us a bit that the aim of it and the primary audience is students, young students. What kind of experience were you hoping to achieve for the students online?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So our starting point with the Forever Project was that daily, before the pandemic, we have been delivering to students at our museum and sharing the testimony of survivors in person with them. So I can kind of just showing you an example here of Martin Stern, one of our survivors, speaking in our hall. And the starting point is the absolute richness of their testimony and the dialogue that occurs between the students and the survivor as they're able to ask their own questions. And as we started to look at the future of Holocaust education when we don't have survivors who are able to speak in the first person and to share that first-hand witness testimony, then we were looking at how the richness of that dialogue was able to continue. And as we started to film the survivors, create that database, create that really rich resource, we had already started to explore working with that online, but obviously hadn't really anticipated how much that would be accelerated through the pandemic. And we found that we had to do so much learning in a short space of time, because prior to that point, the work with the Forever Project had still been in that hall, it had still been in that museum setting. So what we found with working with students online is that sense of almost reverence, not reverence, but a really deep respect for the survivors and for the testimonies is still there as the students are working with those testimonies. And I think that is partly because of that working contextualization and because it is mediated through an educator. But what we have found is the students, I think, really appreciate having that more inquiry-based, explorative approach to learning by being able to ask questions and follow-up questions and being able to determine their own learning pathways to a certain extent. And I think that they have really found that interesting. And I think sometimes there's a sense that they feel more able to ask questions which they perhaps might feel a bit more nervous to ask in person. And it takes away maybe that sense of nervousness to a certain extent in asking those questions.
Isn't it interesting? What you talk about how much you've learned from doing the project. What if anything has surprised you, or really stuck out for you?
I'm thinking about this really specifically because of a conversation I've had with a survivor this week, and it's really difficult to second guess ourselves because, I mean, we started this project maybe 6-7 years ago, and our relationship with the survivors is so close that I think it was actually really difficult for us to kind of look forward and really try to imagine these audiences who wouldn't work in first person with survivors. So I think to a certain extent, it's kind of looking back with a degree of hindsight. But I do think that what we started with was trying to replicate as far as we could that experience in the hall. And what we absolutely underestimated was the kind of the richness of the archive that we were creating and what the potential of that was completely away from the museum setting. And I think if we had looked forward a little bit more, which I don't know if we'd actually been able to do or not, but if we had, I think that we would have probably gone about the process slightly differently, in the sense of, I'll give you an example. So there are questions that the students ask, and they would ask follow-on questions. Now, at the moment, the way that the database works is that each question and answer is standalone. So there isn't a kind of a predetermined path that takes you down into a kind of a deeper understanding of one theme or one particular aspect. But actually, as we look at the potential of filming other survivors, I think that's something that we would look to, because I think that's really beneficial for the students' learning. Now, that's something that would never happen with a survivor in person, usually at the Memorial Hall, because you want as many students as possible to be able to ask a question. So there just isn't the space for that. So that just gives you an example, really, of what we're learning as we're in that online space.
Yeah. And, you know, you're sort of starting with what you already have, your collection of people, and, you know, the opportunity here. And I suppose it echoes the idea that people are always saying, you know, story first, technology second. But how did you, on the sort of choice of technology and the approach you took, what sort of drove you? How did you decide how you were going to do this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And again, I think it was at a time when we were probably, you know, less well versed in terms of digital options and ways of assisting our work. So again, I think this has been so iterative. But I think what was at the heart of it was that sense of dialogue and that Q&A experience. Because when we spoke to teachers and other audiences before the creation of the Forever Project, that was the thing that they told us that they were most nervous about losing, in a way. There is so much filmed testimony that exists of survivors of the Holocaust. All of it is so important and all of it is so critical to preserve. But I think what is so difficult to kind of hold on to is that ability for a 14-year-old boy to listen to a survivor share their testimony and think that is the one bit that really kind of engages me. I really want to know more about, whether it's the faith of the survivor and how that was affected by their experiences, or a sense of justice, or what happened to one person within their family history and story. And it was to be able to preserve that.
Okay, I'm going to ask the audience generally whether if anybody has any specific questions for Louise at this point, will you put them into chat and then I'll ask them of her. So can you, the thing that struck me when we spoke before was that you said, you know, you ask 1,000 questions, and it's just, I mean, you know, and it takes 5 days to record one person. It's an incredible undertaking, isn't it? Are you pleased with the outcomes you've got to so far?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, you know, the kind of the first privilege for us is working with the survivors and our survivor family. The fact that they, with us, undertook this process, I think is absolutely incredible. And I think that it's a huge ask, you know, to be part of this project. And there are things that we're really aware of, you know, during filming and how to support survivors in that sense. But the feedback that we've had from teachers and from students so far, that they're absolutely blown away by the resource, you know, that when they're using it, they think that it's just incredible to be able to have this curated conversation, and just the impact that it still has on students. So yes, absolutely.
Can you say a bit more about the idea of a curated conversation and the role of mediation in the experience?
Yes. So for us, that's something that, particularly because our focus obviously is on education, that's something that for us is a really crucial aspect of this, that in the way that the website is designed, obviously the open Q&A is almost the kind of the highlight, you know, the culmination of the experience, but that will always be within a historical context, partly for appropriateness and having that understanding of the testimony, but also, and you saw there where there were the kind of the model questions to give the students a sense of the questions that we have in the database, because without that, I think you don't have the opportunity for the students to really draw on the depth within the database. So the role of the educator is to, first of all, make sure that the students have that historical context, also that they are able to really access the depth of the content within it. And I think the last thing for us, almost more as a kind of an ethical question that is really important. At the moment, the majority of educators that we have working with those testimonies know all of those survivors, the ones who are still with us, the ones who have passed away in person and knew them well. And there's almost an oral history that accompanies using the Forever Project. You know, I will talk to students about Steve, and you know, he used to get to the end of his testimony and say, right, I'm going to go and take my medicine now. And then he'd go outside and have a cigarette. It's just like all those, you know, those little stories that come from knowing the person. And over time, you know, as the team grows and changes over time, kind of that aspect of the curated, moderated experience and how we do that as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we've had a couple of questions, and I'm just going to go into them. One of them saying, would you be able to tell us a bit about what technology you used, and was it sourced in-house or was it outsourced?
It was outsourced, and we got obviously support, a lot of it of support externally in the creation of this through the technology, and the technology has moved on from the first iteration that we had at the centre. So it uses NLP to match the answer from the database. But the version that we're using now, the online version, is a kind of a progression from the first technology that we had, and almost allows training. So as the resource is used more often, then the matching becomes more accurate. And that's something that we found as we've used it. So the company that hold this technology now, Forever Holdings, is the commercial aspect of the work that has been done and the company that's come from this, but that started from an external source.
And Paul, who's going to be speaking later on, and I think has a vested interest, is asking whether you've ever considered an immersive, a VR experience using the archive.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Initially, the first iteration that was at the museum is a 3D version. So in the first iteration, when students came into the hall, they wore 3D glasses, and there was a 3D version almost kind of sat on the stage, you know, virtually as the survivors would be. And then a top screen above that had a kind of a close-up of the survivor with their PowerPoint as slides were being shared. And what we found actually is that for a lot of the students, the 3D element was less critical to them than the Q&A. And we found that quite a lot of students were watching the top screen, the 2D version, rather than the 3D version. So we have had conversations, you know, only kind of very scant ones, in terms of other technologies available and, you know, the kind of potential of VR, etc. But if I'm really honest, I think what we're still learning about actually is just the pedagogy around working with this resource as it is at the moment. And it's a bit like you said, Linda, it's kind of, you work with the content first and the technology supports. And I feel that we've, particularly because of that online process accelerating so much, we're right in the throes of this learning process. And I think we want to kind of work on this first before then returning to the tech question.
Lovely, thank you very much. So that's the end of the time we've got just with you, Louise. So just a couple of things to say thank you to you, and also to say that there's a question that's in the chat from Rosie Morris. You'll see it, and I wonder if you wouldn't mind, because we're going to bring Claire in, our next speaker now, if you wouldn't mind just writing a reply to that. And then,
of course not. Thank you, Rosie.
and then what we'll do is at the end of the session, you'll come back in and then we'll kind of cover off any other questions that have come to people in the meantime.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. See you later. Okay, so our next speaker is Claire Freeman, who's an audio consultant, and Claire's about to appear, but I just need to flag with you all that Claire's had COVID, and poor Claire is in recovery, I think would be the best way to say it. So Claire's going to be joined by Rob Lindsay from the space, who's also involved in this project and has a bit of knowledge about it, so that if Claire's voice gives up, Rob might just step in and help and answer the questions. Is that fair, Claire? Is that a fair? Okay.
I think that's very, very fair. Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna see how you get on. If it becomes too much, just flag furiously, and we'll flip quickly to Rob. But can you do a bit of setup and tell us about Cornish Tales, the project that you're about to give us a bit more information in? Just give some setup, and then we'll play the audiogram.
Yeah, absolutely. So I imagine that in lots of museums, in the back rooms, you know, the dusty archives that no one dares go down the doors and the shelves, there are many cassette tapes and maybe even older types of tapes that children of today probably wouldn't have a clue what they are. And they're not used. And that was the situation that the Cornwall Museums Partnership found themselves in. And they said, how can we kind of repurpose these? And they have 200 museums under their wing, but they picked out 3. And 3 of the museums opened their doors. They said, here is a list of all the archive we have. Go take it. And in collaboration with a technology company, Hi9, I kind of operated as a bit of an audio consultant, a bit of a curator. We had a creative writer as part of Hi9 and a tech company, which we repurposed these audio archives, these cassette tapes, untouched from 20, 30 years ago. Sound, music, stories, all kinds of things. We turned them into a series of clips, which then were written into a story that worked out eventually to be an interactive, choose your own adventure, Alexa speaker kind of event. This is also a project where I'm really sorry if any of you have Alexa in the background, you may want to turn them off because it could do your head in if they go every 2 seconds. So the clip we've got to play now is just a little montage of 1 or 2 of those stories that we featured once we pulled out those clips.
Okay, lovely. So away, can we have the clip, please?
I remember coming down on an old steam train. Here was this hidden valley just a few miles from Land's End, and one thought, well, you know, where are we?
The actual first time I worked in the tunnel, I do recollect that it was bitterly cold. I don't think we even had doors on the tunnel at that time.
Years ago, the Leat, which flows behind the brewery, used to flood. A lot of these cans got washed down to Patrice Road.
Now these gaunzas is a woolen garment that is meant for fishermen. Each locality, the wives knitted their own particular patterns. Now these gaunzas, because they had their unique patterns, identified lots of men who were drowned and washed up. They knew where they come from by the pattern on the gaunza.
So yeah, that's a little taster of like a montage of some of the clips that we did. And I actually went through, we had an extensive Google Docs spreadsheet, which if any of you saw, you'd think that we sneezed on a spreadsheet, but we collected 29 hours of raw audio. I then listened through and themed them, highlighted some of the interesting ones and made it into 180 audio clips, which then a creative writer looked at making a story where people could choose where they wanted to go to next in the interactive story, either by a theme, a location, you know, do you want to go to the harbour? Do you want to go and hear more about the artists? And there were something like 800 plus permutations, I think. So that was kind of at the heart of what it was, but there was something a little bit wider in terms of audience as well. as the original kind of scope of the project was to take the archives and see whether we could use it as a research project to help people in care homes who had dementia. So how could we take these sounds, these places, these stories to help offer them some respite, and for the carers in the care homes to kind of get these people involved in technology, because we were aware when we first started the project, all of us together actually, about some research that had been out there to show that smart speakers are used by older audience, not just a younger audience, and not also just used as a functional aspect. So not just as a timer to tell you that your cooking is ready now, or a timer to tell you to take your tablets. Actually, people wanted to use these things, and it was also a really great way of tackling isolation, loneliness, feeling like that people would build relationships with smart speakers almost as a friend. So we wanted to provide something that could work for that audience and see how did they engage with it. And a little bit like what Louise was saying, I suppose we wanted to kind of explore some of the themes about what kind of things were people asking, were there kind of like trends in the routes that people wanted to take through the story. Do most people want to kind of hear the same music track again and again and again, or did they want to hear something different? Music was also something we featured. People could go into a pub and listen and choose which track they wanted to listen to, not just the stories about people from the war. And I think, like, as someone who works, I come from more of a BBC background, more about the news, but quite often when you work as a journalist, you have to kind of send lots of emails to get access to these kind of archives. You have to be banging the door down, begging, maybe paying a lot of money to get access to these, but it was great to kind of get access to hear and see this. And I felt, as most of the project was done during lockdown, many of us never ever met each other, still haven't. We kind of formed a connection over Zoom. But it was great to kind of be sat there listening to, a man talking about his time during the war when he worked in the Solomon Islands and the island ran out of toilet paper. Such a random thing that, yes, it might not necessarily have a place inside the museum, but it did in the context of this story. It was a nice kind of little bit of colour amongst lots of different things. So I don't know if that kind of just gives a bit of a flavour of what it is we're doing.
It does, and I'm hearing a bit of a croak in your throat. I'm wondering if you can carry on talking, whether I should go to Rob for a minute.
I'm going to have a little drink of my non-branded fizzy drink, but yeah.
So I'm just going to ask Rob then, from hearing what Claire said so far, what do you think about the learnings that have come out? Essentially, this is an R&D project. How could we use the archive? What would you say about the learnings that have come from the project?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one thing that I do want to touch upon as well, because this in addition to what was achieved within this project in terms of the technical accomplishments as well, I just want to pick up and expand upon what Claire's just said there about the fact that everyone was collaborating on this remotely. There are partners on this project who have still never met one another. The entire thing from inception through to delivery has happened entirely remotely. And I think I just want to recognize Claire's role on this project in terms of little things like bridging the language between technology and the art sector as well. I think that was a huge element that had to be addressed, a number of times in order to make sure that the museum staff were clear on what was being used, why things were being used. And yeah, at the same time that the questions and the asks from the tech partner were being translated and they were getting what they needed as well. In addition to that, I just want to flag as well, because I know, Claire, you did some additional work with the staff at the museums as well, because while they had protocols in place for recording, documenting, capturing, authenticating all of this audio material, citing their sources, obviously times, dates, and all that sort of stuff, so that they knew that things were reliable as sources. At the same time, there wasn't necessarily protocols in place with regard to what these things would ultimately be used for. There was an element of these things maybe being recorded The idea being that they might one day be used in a documentary or they might be transcribed. Nothing really beyond that. You know, you talked there about there being dusty shelves of tape formats that a lot of us might not even recognize anymore, you know, and I just think it's really, really important to recognize that, because I know you did end up doing quite a lot of work with the people from the museums in order to say, okay, let's build upon these protocols you've got now that we're starting to understand the digital opportunities that are afforded to us and the sort of things you might need within these audio recordings in order to make them browsable and accessible. I mean, you mentioned 29 hours of recordings, and, you know, I'm sure there were hundreds, if not thousands more as well. You know, it's a lot of things to go through. So yeah, I just wanted to flag that aspect of the project as well, that ended up going alongside the output, you know, making sure that people had that level of understanding in order to make future work more approachable, really. Yeah, but yeah, it's more of an observation and an extra detail rather than a question.
That brings us on to you know, sort of really thinking about Claire's particular role in this as an audio consultant and what she's learned from it and what she might say to any other arts organisation or collection thinking about doing something similar.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I suppose I don't work for Cornwall Museums Partnership. This is their project. You know, I came in as an outsider. And whilst we had the initial idea to kind of convert all these tapes and make this thing, there was a lot more to it, I think. So, you know, from my point of view, when we actually dug out these files, although some of them were digitized, some of them, you know, were 5.1 surround sound HD films that were getting sent to me from Cornwall. And no disservice to Cornwall, but the Wi-Fi was very slow. So it would take days sometimes to send like an hour file to me. And, you know, just the quality of some. So when we thought for this kind of situation, what I needed was clean conversation where I could lift out clips. So ideally, I didn't need an interviewer talking over somebody. I didn't need the kind of the typical things that we do when we're in person with each other, where we go, oh right, oh yeah, needed none of that. So if you are capturing audio, even just for archiving purpose, it's definitely worth bearing in mind. Please make sure that you don't interrupt, just give it clean, because some of it we just couldn't use. It needed to be kind of solo rather than two people being interviewed at the same time. And the quality, you know, there was stuff that was on cassette tape, which when we converted it was really hissy. I can't really put that on something, you know, next to another quality. So there are kind of standards that we had to adhere to make it work, because ultimately when we put the audio clips onto the Google Assist or Alexa smart speaker platforms, they needed to adhere to a certain level of quality, and levels wise, they need to be the same. You don't want one clip that's blaring at you and another clip that's really quiet. So it took us a little while, and there were things that we had to put aside and say, we can't use that, as beautiful as it is in reality. And I think also this idea, Linda, that you were talking about, story first, tech second, it was something that we wrestled with a lot, actually. Because we were writing a script around the audio clips. And at first we were like, do we write the script and then we put the clips in where we think? But in the end, we had to completely flip it upside down, get the clips that we wanted and write the script to work around the clips. And it was just quite a long process. Even the testing, you know, I've never worked with a tech company before in how you make one of these interactive stories on Alexa and Google, the testing they had to do, the different stages, the permutation checks they have to do, but then also access to, well, which is where we're at now really in terms of seeing the analytics and perhaps the usage. We're not quite there in kind of finishing the report yet. That's still to come. But you know, there was a lot more to it than let's just get some stories and make a pretty thing. It's probably at least 6 months.
Okay, thank you. We've just got a minute or so. If anybody has any particular questions to Claire, do you want to put them into chat now, and we'll quickly either answer them, or if we run out of time, I'll ask Claire to do it in a written form. But just can anybody who has an Alexa or a smart speaker access the content? Is there a link we should be putting into chat for anybody who wants to have a go at this? Is it? Oh,
there is. Rob got it. Yeah.
No, I haven't. I was going to ask a question. I
Oh,
put my hand up
okay.
before.
Oh, you're so polite, putting your hand
Sorry.
up as a panelist.
Really,
You could just interrupt. You're like the boss or something, aren't you?
we've just got a minute, so quick question, quick answer.
Yeah, it was just a very, very quick question I had, which was, well, in fact, I can come back to this because I've seen possibly a quicker question had just appeared in the chat, and I don't want to deny someone else the chance.
Yeah, no, go for that one first, and then we'll.
Yeah, so Susie says in the chat, did you find any workarounds for using lower quality sounds, or did you have to just put things aside for the sake of this project?
Yeah, sometimes what I would do is I would use free sound effects, and I would do shorter clips for those. If we really, really, really wanted something, there are things that I could do in terms of noise reduction and normalizing and things like that. But yeah, sound effects got us out of a lot of holes. Sounds of waves, they cover everything, don't they?
Yeah.
In Cornwall, not so useful if you're in Cambridgeshire, where I live.
Obviously, yeah.
Okay,
And I
so
suppose
really quick.
Yeah, the thing I just wanted to ask was, there was a level of onboarding on this. So obviously when people first take part in the project, there's a few things to kind of guide them in. I know that, for example, Louise talking about the project that they've done earlier on, there is a page that has almost demonstration questions, things to try out. And I know that there was an audio version of this on this project as well, where people were given a couple of very easy to answer questions. I'm right in saying that, am I? There was a little bit at the beginning inviting people to give their name and to kind of introduce themselves to the experience, and give them some initial questions. It's just some of those discussions around that element of how the user is guided into the process at the beginning.
Yeah, it's not really my bag to kind of answer that. It's more like high nine. That's more like the tech company. And I think that's why, if you are looking at going down this route, you really need to look for a tech company who really understand the arts and culture world, because actually the tech world and the arts world together are very two different slow-moving beasts, fast-moving beasts. So it's about finding the right partner. That would be one that they would explain far better than I could.
Okay,
fantastic,
lovely.
Fantastic answer.
I'm going to say thank you to Claire and for Rob for stepping in as well at moments there. We're going to have a 5-minute break, and then Claire, if you wouldn't mind just being around on chat if people have got questions to ask you separately. So we'll come back at literally 5 minutes. So it'll be 2 minutes past 12 and we'll hear from Paul Long at that point. So we won't hear anything until then. Thanks. Okay, so we're back with our third case study. So this time you'll hear from Paul Long, who is the director of Metro Boulot Dodo. MBD, I'll say it that way, who are an immersive storytelling organisation, and he'll tell you a little bit more about them. And Paul, are you around?
I'm right here, yes.
Hello. So I'm very sorry for that muddle, but we're all really here to talk about heritage stories, and it's different from the other case studies in that although it was a collaboration with the Herbert, it really starts with you, doesn't it, and your company. So I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about how you conceived of the idea of heritage stories, and then you're going to show us a trailer and which will give us a flavour of how it works and what it offers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's important to kind of give a bit of context, I think, to us as a company, because as you say, now we call ourselves an immersive storytelling company. I guess we have been that for a long time, but not immersive technology in the way that we think of it now, I think is the main thing. We're an arts company rather than specifically a kind of museum or historical company. And we actually started in 1997, so 24 years ago, as a theatre company. That's what I trained in, that's what we started out doing. And we spent some years kind of touring theatre. And then we branched out into other kind of immersive experiences, so tours and things like that. So we did, at that point, this around 2000, so 20 years ago, we started working in museums, but things like the basements of museums. And we would work with historic houses and kind of heritage sites and this kind of thing. doing different pieces of work. So our links with heritage go back a long way. And throughout all of that, we always work with technology. So we always did a lot of work in terms of automation, how we would set up the lighting systems and the video that was included with the tours, how we recorded the sound, etc. All through those years, we kind of crafted this way of working that brought people into spaces, physical spaces, and at the same time we were still touring, sometimes to theatres, but also to street arts festivals, nationally, internationally as well. So our background is very much as an arts company, and I think that's kind of important to how we came into this project. The real kind of driving force behind it was two things. First of all, we started working with virtual reality about 5 or 6 years ago, and we began making more linear kind of projects, but built within a games engine. So the same kind of software that you would use to make things for PlayStation and all of that, all of those kind of console type games or PC type games. And we realized that this was a great immersive space, but B, it meant we didn't have to tour lots of stuff everywhere anymore and lift things in and out of trucks all the time, which frankly I think I was getting a bit too old for. And the shine began to wear off. So there was this kind of realization that we could build big, immersive, spectacular spaces with the immersive technology. And there's one project in particular that we went back to from 2004, which was called Fib, where we made an installation based around 14 boxes, and all of those boxes contained small 3-minute individual experiences. And when we started looking at VR, we translated this into the idea of a lift. And we said, well, just imagine if we don't have to tour all the 14 boxes, actually, but we can just create these miniature experiences and then put them together in a multi-story, and I say that it's a pun, S-T-O-R-E-Y, obviously, because of the lift, a multi-story experience which we can kind of join collections of things together, whether that's around a theme or in this case museum collections, obviously, that people could actually just get in the lift, push a button, choose a story, get out, and then, you know, experience a 3 to 5 minute piece, and then just go back in the lift and choose another one. And for us, it was a beautiful kind of scalable way of making an immersive experience. And we'll come back to the kind of practical things behind that, I think, a little bit later about how that reuses floor space, etc. But I think the primary thing now is I'll just share that introduction video, as you said, Linda, and then we can have a chat about it. Hopefully it will make more sense after this. So just give me a moment to share my screen.
Okay, and as ever, if you've got questions for Paul, anything that's coming into your mind, please put them into chat as we're going along.
So you should be able to see and hear this, I hope.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Thanks, Paul. So this is an installation that went into the Herbert, and then presumably the public could just come in and go into the lift, and away they went.
Exactly that, yeah. So I mean, basically we were working through different versions of virtual reality. So we'd made kind of more, as I said, seated linear storytelling kind of video versions. And this was us trying out I mean, what we call 6 degrees of freedom, but basically it means you can walk around in virtual reality as well. So this had a 4 meter by 3 meter footprint, which was effectively a big rubber mat. Everything else was virtual, but you could walk around freely it on that mat and explore the space with a backpack PC and a VR headset, and actually just be able to kind of reach out and interact with those worlds. And then the lift was there, as it says, as a kind of a metaphor, if you like, but really as a transport mechanism to get between the different floors. So one of the first piece that we built primarily, specifically for the project, was the one that you see mostly in the video that I shared, which was about an ichtyosaur skull, which was part of the Herbert Gallery's collection. And so we found out the story behind the skull and then recreated parts of that. Effectively, the skull was discovered. Somebody was charged with cycling back to Warwickshire with this skull, but decided it was too heavy and threw it in a ditch halfway, and then was sent back to kind of retrieve it. So there's these whole, I think the point is there's these whole stories that happen around collection items, which you don't get from just seeing the item. And for me, the potential of the immersive tech was to be able to, tell the background, tell and see the background, the context, the story. That goes with those collection items. Yeah.
And what was you said that quite a lot of it was about the evaluation and understanding the audience experience. What did you learn from the audiences who took part and how they felt about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, all of this comes in the context of having done other things as well in virtual reality, so it all feeds into the same thing. But I think a lot of the time there is an assumption that, you go into projects like this and say, oh, we're using technology, therefore it's for young people, and that was one of the first things that the Herbert kind of said. And we tried to say, well, if it's about young people, then take the work to where the young people are. We can put virtual reality on to the stores where the headset owners are, etc. But if it's actually about the museum, then also, there may be some new young people come in, but your existing audiences are still going to come in, and they may not, predominantly they were slightly older, which is why they wanted to target younger people. And we said it still needs to be right for those people coming in. And I think the fascinating thing was that it did exactly that. I mean, I think the expectation that Herbert was maybe that the older audiences wouldn't want to engage. And actually, I think they were the drivers. They were the ones who were coming in one day and then coming back the next day with their friends and the next day with more friends. And that kind of, that the museum existing audience was expanding with that. Whereas for us, as I say, not so much with this project, but with other projects, if you can also take your collection items and put them online, that's a completely new audience. For us during the pandemic year, we had 130,000 views on our different virtual reality projects. They're people we couldn't have possibly got to physically, even if there wasn't a pandemic. That's more people than we could physically reach with the format that we've got. So I think those things, it's really important that you look at them in tandem and that you say, the work that we're doing now, it doesn't have to live in one place. And for me, that is the beauty of the technology. The technology opens it up to a whole new world of people.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think one of the things that you said, which I'm going to ask everybody else about later as well, because it's really interesting. You said to me that you thought that museums were the best available technology at the time when they were built to present a collection. And this, and if you were doing it today, you might start in a different way round. And I guess that's almost what you've done, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. I think the point I tried to make with that is, I have the same conversation around theatres. People say, oh, VR, it's not like live theatre because live theatre is live. And I would say if you go to a theatre show, when you actually go into the auditorium, they turn all the lights off and make you all look in one direction, and kind of people don't talk with each other. The conversation is everything that happens around it. And I think it's the same for museums, the collection items themselves, for me, are the most important thing, and the story that surrounds them. And a lot of museums will have started with somebody having a collection or a group of people having a collection, then going, how do we share it? And I think at the time, the answer, how do we share it, is if we have a building big enough to house our collection, then we can invite people to come and see it. And that still stands today. That's still an amazing way to share collection items. But I think my point is now there are other alternatives as well. If we have a collection item like that ichtyosaur skull, how do we share it? And also, who do we share it with? Becomes a very different question, because we can reach more people than geographically a building might do. But also, we can tell more of the story behind it than the item itself maybe does. And then kind of off the back of that, I guess it comes with all the same questions as opening a building, doesn't it? It's like, how do you pay for it? How do you get people to engage, et cetera, et cetera? But actually, the creative heart of it is is wanting the same thing. It's going, these collections are beautiful, these collections are important, these items need to have their stories told, and that's what we want to do.
Thank you. Just again, if anybody has any particular questions for Paul, put them into chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask Rob whether there's anything particular that you'd like to add or ask of Paul.
Yeah, so I suppose it's similar to the question that asked Claire as well about, I'm aware, and I'm sure all of us are aware, that there is a kind of human element to all of that, which is our users, our audiences, our visitors. And equally, there are projects like Heritage Stories that does require a level of kind of onboarding. You know, there is still a human element needed, a level of staffing, really. I just wondered if I could ask you a little bit about that. I'm aware in particular that you went to great lengths to make sure that the experience was as simple and straightforward as possible for museum staff or volunteers to turn it on, to get it working in the morning. Again, I know that you're aware that projects like this, of any kind like this, people, the public, almost need to be given permission to pick things up and put things on and try things out. I just wondered if I can ask you a little bit about that, really.
Yeah, and I think understandably, you know, that people can be nervous of technology, you know, especially the volunteers and the people running it, as well as you say, the public as well. I mean, I think for us, a lot of it was a natural progression from what I said before, from our touring days. So when we used to tour with shows, or even if we used to do gallery installations, you know, gallery installations could be in 6-8 weeks. And they were very technology led, but essentially we knew that the people in the morning had to press one button to turn it on and everything else needed to work. So that's what we did with this project. It was effectively, we just made sure that in terms of the actual equipment, once you switched the computer on, it booted itself into the project that it needed. It made sure it kind of looked for the headset, it set up the kind of perimeter zone and all of that completely automatically. So the onboarding bit that we spent a long time with the volunteers was just making sure they were comfortable with how people can put the headset on, and kind of explaining what the experience was going to be. Because I think part of the nervousness with VR in particular is you can't see what you're going to do before you do it. So it's really important to kind of put people at ease, and make sure that they understand what is going to happen to them so that they're comfortable at the point they go in. But that's not really a technology question. You know, if we make the technology job easy for the volunteers, then explaining what things are is what they do on a daily basis. So, you know, that I think that worked really well. It's just making sure that we, you know, don't set them up for a fall in terms of making something so complicated they can't use it. But that, you know, that's beneficial for us and them, because also we don't want to be called on a daily basis to ask how to switch something back on because it's broken, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask a question? You're sort of thinking about audiences and making things easy, and I'm going to bring the others back in on this as well. But I wondered about how big a part, or what considerations you gave to accessibility in terms of all audiences being able to access the VR. And I know with VR there's probably quite specific issues, but did you give that much consideration? How do we make this as accessible as possible? And I will ask the other two the same question.
I mean, we did, but also, as I said, it's kind of an iterative thing with all the projects at the moment. So now we're working with Leicester University and with a PhD student to do much more research into accessibility in VR, and things that we can do to help. So it's because we're working in a 3D space, things like, you know, subtitles don't work in quite the same way as they would normally, because you've got multiple characters in multiple spaces. So we can start attaching subtitles to people and things like that. It becomes a lot easier. But I mean, all of our projects now that are online, all the video-based ones, we've subtitled all of those. But yeah, I mean, there are issues with VR, and some of them are really difficult to overcome because they're hardware based. You know, like we made a project, Empire Soldiers: A South Asian Story, which was about South Asian troops' contribution to World War I. Obviously, a large number of people who were interested in watching that and came along to it, also they wore turbans, and VR headsets and turbans are not a great mix. So you've got all of those kind of access questions as well about physically how easy is it to get into VR. So there's a lot of things. I mean, I think at the moment we're mostly focused on the audio side of it, because that is something that we have a specialist on our board who deals with that, who also works for the university. So it gives us a really clear direction of travel to actually start solving those problems first, rather than doing everything at once.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course. Thank you. And Claire or Louise, do you have any anything you could add really in terms of thinking about accessibility? Louise?
I completely agree with Paul that I think it's something that, again, has been kind of a really iterative process for us. So I think part of it came from working with the schools, and that sense of always working with quite a diverse audience at the centre in terms of the student groups, but then also thinking about members of the public and older members of the public, and actually in terms of the way that they wanted to access and work with Forever, we found it was quite different. So some of the things that I was talking about in terms of contextualization, whereas for students, we're looking at creating, you know, kind of shorter versions of the testimony, working with excerpts. Actually, for some of our older audiences, they wanted to sit and watch the testimony in full and then ask questions at the end. So just the way that they wanted to kind of work with or engage with the resource was different. But in terms of some of those other questions, access questions like subtitling, similarly, you know, kind of it's iterative for us, and there are things that in the future that we would want to do in terms of that. The second thing, I just if you didn't mind me chipping in, was what Paul was saying about the kind of the role of volunteers and, you know, people who are actually working with the technology. And that has been a huge learning process for us in terms of the Forever project. And we've got quite a big team of educators who work with the Forever project. And we had, particularly kind of in the first iterations when it was on site, people were understandably really nervous about working with new tech. And I'm going to talk for myself because it's easier, but that kind of sense of, you know, the kind of if something doesn't work kind of immediately in the way you expect it to, you're almost afraid to touch it again in case you break it. It's just kind of like how you get over kind of that sense. And we went back to the company that we'd worked with. And I always remember Chris, who we worked with, saying to me, you know, just because you go and sit in a car, it doesn't mean you can drive. You have to learn how to drive. You have to learn how to use the technology. And we actually appointed 2 educators who were our drivers. So they got absolutely immersed in using Forever. They worked really closely with Chris, kind of on the tech side, who explained, okay, well, when you do this with the microphone, that's why it does that. So they kind of got all of that insider information, and then they taught us to be drivers too. And I think kind of having people in the team who take on, you know, that kind of developing confidence by not being afraid to ask what you perceive as daft questions, I think is a really important part of it.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. Claire, did you have anything to add? So either on specifically about accessibility or anything that sparked by what Louise has just said?
No, I mean, I think similar to what Louise had said, you know, we actually partnered with a firm which went and, you know, worked with care homes to collaborate with the carers, you know, so that they could take this product and work with them so that, you know, the people who we wanted to reach were able to, and if there were sticking points, you know, if there were bugs or it crashed or something, rather than what Louise has said, oh, forget it, can't be bothered, actually you could go back and figure out what happened. I think that was really important. And I suppose from an audio point of view, I know I'm biased, but sometimes I do worry that people focus a lot about what things look like, but for a true immersive experience, when you're wearing headphones, don't discount that the audio experience is actually just as important, if not sometimes more important. And when you think about the layering of like sound effects and speech, make sure you get that kind of quite right, because with certain audiences, particularly an older audience, if you've got too much sound effects and they can't hear what they're saying, it is the #1 complaint of BBC TV audiences, is that the music was too loud.
Thank you. Paul's going to say something, and I just want to point you to, we've had a question in chat really, which you might want to come back to, which is sort of saying, have you looked at volunteers from diverse backgrounds and thinking about how they might, adults with additional needs who could take part in thinking about accessibility and be part of that? Paul, over to you. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to add to, what's been said all round. I think the key thing with all of it working with technology is patience. I mean, like I said, for us, we're an arts company, but I think it's important to say now that we did lots of projects with different technical partners where we had that same thing of like, you would go through a project and it would be a certain number of months. And then at the end of it, you kind of lose that partner and that skill set and that knowledge, and it moves on and you go somewhere else. And we kind of learn with it, but eventually we just said, well, actually, look, if we want to seriously work with technology on an ongoing basis, we need to employ these people to work with us. And so now, like, we're an arts company, but 4 of our team are all games developers, and we've brought them from the technology sector into the company. Having done that, I would say it took us a good 6 months, maybe more, to actually understand what the hell each other were talking about. There was a lot of patience that went along with that we were just talking very different languages. But I think that's what also really helped us with the developers, or me with the developers when I was talking to them, is that I understood what it meant to tour something. I understood what it meant when volunteers had to use something, because we'd been through all of that process in a different context. And it's absolutely true that, you have to hold people's hands through that process. But also there are a lot of things that you can do to prepare for it so that you take away some of the problems, and we've worked really hard on that for all of our projects.
Thank you. I'm just going to sort of push to the future. So we had a question which was about, well, there's 2 things really. One is the question of how do you make this, so this is to everybody, so whoever just wants to answer, wave your hand. But one part of it is cost effectiveness. How do you make this cost effective? And then another question, which I guess feeds into that really, was somebody asked us, well, how do you future-proof this work? Because don't you have to upgrade technology every few years? So I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts on that. Oh, Rob, got it.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to this.
Yeah.
I just specifically in terms of future-proofing, really. I think it's really, really notable that all of the projects that we've seen here discussed, all the projects we've seen here presented today, there is a modular aspect to them. All of these projects are possibly less about media and more about an infrastructure for exhibition materials, for information, for stories. There is an element here of introducing our visitors, our audiences, our guests to new ways of them engaging with us, engaging with our artifacts, with our exhibitions, with our materials. I think what's really, really interesting is that all of these projects can grow. All of these projects can keep up with new technology. Floors on the elevator can be added or switched out or replaced with something else. Again, the infrastructure that's been put together by Cornwall Museums Partnership can have new threads added, new strands added, new materials added. And equally, the material that's going on the Forever Online project as well. That's something that can be expanded. And I know that there are additional volunteers that are being added into that, certainly plans to do that moving forward as well. I think what's really interesting is that the technology behind any large online or digital offering is constantly changing, and probably in ways that audiences don't notice. I'm sure something like Amazon has changed the way in which it's functioned, operated, or the services that it's offered a number of times. Again, there will be a necessity of needing to keep up with that in the same way that there will be with everything if you want to, or it may be that something can be put together that's self-contained and is happy to sit there as an evergreen piece of content for a large amount of time. I would stress as well, it does feel we're sort of getting to the point where a few of these things are starting to level out a little bit. A lot of the digital imagery is starting to catch up with celluloid, starting to come up with more traditional levels of film as well. And again, at the same time, I think we're starting to get to a point where even things like the definition of film or TV is starting to catch up with how much an eye can absolutely consume. There are debates about whether or not 100 frames a second is any better than 60, any better than 40, and so forth. So yeah, I would say it's important for projects to feel modular. I don't think that we're having to look at something and say this is either going to last forever, or at the same time the entire thing is going to have to be replaced in too short a space of time to justify taking those steps.
Thanks, Rob. Paul's got a comment, and then we've had a question from the audience, and so I'll come to that next. Oh, go on, Paul. And Louise, I think we'll have to leave. You might need to drop your point into chat, Louise, to kind of get through it. But Paul, just over to you for a sec.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate what Rob said, I think it's kind of easy to think that a lot of these problems are just related to digital, but they're not. You know, if you built a museum and nobody went in it and you didn't do anything, you didn't heat it and you didn't maintain it for, 100 years, it would fall apart. And the same applies to a digital project. If you make something and don't do anything with it, eventually it will come out of date. So I think the key thing is make sure it stays alive, keep adding to it, keep maintaining it, keep contributing to it. It's not exclusively digital that has this problem. Everything has this problem. You have to build infrastructures, like Rob said, that actually can actively be updated. Every time you put a new floor in the lift, for example, you would have to update the project to the latest version of the games engine software. So by necessity, you're always keeping the project alive and up to date, in the same way as, if you invite people around for dinner, you have to put the heating on. It's not just digital that needs looking after. A physical collection, think of conservation in museums. That's not a digital problem, but if you don't do it, it'll fall apart. And just think of it in the same way as the physical project that you might do, or a collection that you might have.
Thank you. I think I can see Louise typing away, so she's obviously got a response that will appear in a second. But in the meantime, we were asked a question, which the wide question that we were asked in advance was about the role of the curator in all of this technology. And the specific question is, what about the sort of ethical considerations when framing artifacts / media within technology? Does it change their meaning? So what kind of, how does the curator play a part in this, and some of the sort of, thinking about the objects and what they mean? So,
yes,
you've got
I suppose I could kind of chip in on this, because one of the things that we kind of realized when we gathered these 29 hours worth of raw audio, and we kind of started to listen through, some of the interviews were done in the late 80s, and then even some in the last few years, and the things and the language they were using, we thought wasn't really going to be appropriate to talk about in current times. As we were making it, we were watching our TVs talking about Black Lives Matters, and it just didn't feel appropriate. And it was a really kind of tricksy thing that we had to all just kind of sit and think about, because you are editing someone's history, someone's conversation, someone's truth, but where we're recontexting in this kind of more future-led, modern kind of time travel story, and we were quoting it as a time travel, we still didn't feel that it was appropriate for the current times, because you're treating it like a new product that is being released today. It's not really thinking about it as something. I know we talk a lot about colonialism and recontextualizing things, but this wasn't really the project to kind of go and do that. So in that case, we decided to not use some of the conversations or the clips. We just opted out. But there was a lot of conversations that we had about, what do we do about this? How do we move forwards? Do they play a part or do they not play a part? And I suppose as a curator, you're conscious of your bias, aren't you, as well, that you can bring in. You're looking to get the best stories, and it's a very complicated thing. So add and expect time for that, I suppose, if that's responding to your question, Alexander.
I think it's a really good response. And I'm also thinking about, Louise being in the different situation of you're looking back at some existing archive, and what Louise is doing is thinking, the team thinking about what questions might be asked, and that, the questions around that too.
I had the most important conversation with a survivor this week, and she was asking about the questions, and she was saying, even she's ferociously intelligent survivor, and she was saying, even the language that we use will change over the next however many years. So how do you future-proof it in that way? And we were saying that obviously we treat the testimony, like Rob was saying, as that kind of absolutely kind of critical kind of first source, and that is, the facts are the facts are the facts. It's unedited, it's not changed. It is understood as testimony. So when I say, that it's something objective, it is memory, but that is the kind of the starting point. if then we work with that in a different way, and we kind of bring the kind of context around it up to date so it can be used, we're honest about that and we're open about that. But the question that she asked me that I think like just really made me kind of stop and think, she said, what is the end date for the resource? You know, we're talking about this testimony being listened to and being used in 100 or 150 years time. What is the point at which people won't listen to my story anymore? And I said to her, well, that question is less around, you know, technology or anything to do with that. It's about Holocaust education and the relevance of Holocaust education. And the only answer that I have to a certain degree is that for 13-year-olds today, despite the fact that the Holocaust feels so out of, you know, anything to do with their memory, it could be eons ago for kind of their realm of experience, they absolutely still have that understanding of the importance to learn about it. So that's almost like a philosophical question around future-proofing that I just thought, you know, that's incredible. And actually, like Rob said, you know, the kind of the tech is so secondary to that. It's just, you know.
Thank you very much. And I think Paul, you wanted to kind of come in on a similar point.
Yeah, Ish, I suppose it was more to do with what was said at the end about the tech being secondary. I mean, I think it's less of the kind of ethical side of it, but it's been mentioned quite a lot today. Story first, tech second. You know, is one of those phrases that's come up quite a lot, and I don't disagree at all that content is king. You know, technology on its own is no good to anyone. You know, it is a platform for other things, but I think what I would say is it's really important when you're making any project like this that you try to have an understanding of what the technology can do first. So for us at the moment, we're working on social VR, which means that we've been looking at technically how we can get 6 people in the space talking to each other, all in VR headsets all at the time. That has a massive impact on the story that we create. You know, if we just wrote a book and then thought that we could turn it into a multi-person VR experience, it wouldn't work, because there are certain things that you can do in certain settings that you can't do in others. You know, like it's the difference between what you can do with a film or what you can do in a book, etc. Especially if you get into interaction, multiple people all at the same time, etc., etc. I think we need to kind of get past the hierarchy. Personally, I think it needs to be the two things need to work together. They must be, you know, the vehicle for the story is as important as the story is itself for the best product at the end of it. And once we get to that point, we can start reimagining, like I said earlier, how we want to share things, what that marketplace looks like, who the audience are, because, you know, like audiences who are interacting with Steam, for example, for online headsets are very different to our museum audiences, and the expectations are going to be very different. It's really important to be able to understand that, I think, going into the projects as well. So I appreciate that not everybody has that kind of capability in-house like we do, but I think it was it Claire who said earlier, find somebody that you can work with that can really kind of help you through that process, but do it early. I mean, the amount of times that I've seen briefs written by people for technology that they don't understand, that I'm going, I can't build that. There's no way to do it. Like, have that conversation earlier. Make sure that your conversation around technology starts before you put the word out to try and get people to make it for you.
Thank you very much. We've got 1 minute left, quite literally. So does anybody have anything? So that feels like a really good piece of learning from you, I guess, and encouragement to other people. Is there anything else anybody thinks would be a really good tip or steer that you'd like to share in 30 seconds before we finish up? Oh, Paul's got another one. Go on then.
I think I mentioned it earlier, but the big thing for me, which doesn't just apply to museums or collections or anything, for me, take the art to where the people are. So it's all that, it's the idea that kind of work out where the people are, for us, people using VR headsets, and then make sure that we put the artwork where they want it, rather than trying to get everybody to come to us.
Yes.
That's my
Thank you.
audience
Thank
thing.
you very much. Anybody else before we finish up?
I think mine would be prepared to do as much learning once you start using what you've created as when you are creating it, and just allow yourself lots of time for it to kind of raise new questions and for you to carry on developing it, and don't kind of hold on kind of resolutely to kind of whatever your first idea was, so that don't let it kind of hold you back and move kind of with it, I think is what we've learned.
Lovely. Okay, smashing. And Claire, there's 30 seconds if you've got a last piece of advice before I beg everybody to fill in the evaluation form.
I think, if you're kind of just thinking, I'm interested in this, but I'm not really sure where to start. I mean, the first thing is, can you offer further context of the exhibitions you already have on display? Can you use digital? What about repurposing things that are sat in your back rooms? And then also never forget the importance of thinking about distribution and partnership once you've made this thing, about promoting and marketing. Think about that from the start.
Lovely, smashing. Thank you so much. There is somebody's asking the question, is there anywhere I can go for resources and advice? So if anybody has any ideas, please put them into chat, because that'll be open whilst we're still here.
We have the Space podcast, the Space Arts podcast, if you wish to hear about funding, commissioning and case studies.
Lovely, thank you, Claire. And just finally, just to say thank you very much to everybody to our panelists for sharing their insights. It's been really good fun, and thank you everybody for contributing, for listening and for your questions. And as I said, please fill in the evaluation form before you leave. Thank you all. And that's that. We'll just say goodbye and then off we'll go, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all.